So welcome today to our episode of Wild Sarasota. Today we are going to talk about Florida's wildcats. Our native wildcats in our state are bobcats and Florida panthers. So we're going to talk about both of those today, but I know you're probably most excited about Florida panthers because those are the ones that are more rare that we don't see very often. So before we get started, let me just introduce myself a little bit more. I, as Adelaide said, am the Ecology and Natural Resources Educator at University of Florida IFAS Extension, Sarasota County. Every county in the state of Florida has an extension office, and so even if you're on the call today and you're not from Sarasota County, there's an extension office in your county. Even if you're from a different state, there are extension offices in all states as well. So we are here to assist with sharing the information and research that's done at our land-grant universities with the public and help our communities have solutions for issues and problems that they're having. So these are some of the programs that I do. I teach the University of Florida IFAS Florida Master Naturalist Program. I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. It is an adult education program about Florida's ecosystems. I am a trainer for Project Wild, which are groups of classes for formal and informal teachers on wildlife and conservation activities that they can do with children. I run the LIFE program, which stands for Learning in Florida's Environment. This is an elementary education program in environmental science that prior to COVID-19 involved 3 field trips for 4th and 5th graders out to our natural areas in Sarasota County. Currently, we're doing them as videos, which are available to the public on YouTube. There's a little bit about my background. Prior to this position, I actually was a physician for almost 15 years and decided to come full circle in my career and come back to environmental education, which I absolutely love. So I started at the Extension office about 3.5 years ago. I've lived for over 20 years in Oscar Scherer State Park with my husband, who is the current park manager here. So I get to live right out here in the wild, which is fabulous. So as I mentioned, all counties in the state of Florida have an extension office. Extension offices are partnerships between the county they're in, the University of Florida here in our state, and the USDA. And here in Sarasota County, we have a large staff and faculty, and these are some of the program areas that we are available to assist our community with. We do a lot of educational programming, which of course currently is now mostly all online, but eventually we'll get back to that in-person programming. You also can call or email us with any questions in any of these areas that you have. Here are some of the programs that you might be familiar with. I actually saw a few Master Gardeners join us already today. I saw some of my Florida Master Naturalist students that are in a class right now with me join as well. And there are a variety of different programs that we offer. All right, so let's move on to our topic for today, Florida's wildcats. So these are the things we're going to talk about. We have about an hour together left, and I will leave some time for Q&A at the end, as Adelaide mentioned. So I'm going to talk to you guys for about 45, maybe 50 minutes at the most. I've got lots of great pictures, and we're going to cover all of these different areas about bobcats and panthers. So before we do that, I am going to share a poll with you. So on your screen is going to pop up 2 questions. And so if you can click on your answer to each of these questions before we move on. So our first question is, how many of you have seen a Florida panther in the wild? Wow, our first person says they definitely have. So go ahead and answer those questions for me. And our second question that you see on your screen is, how confident are you that you could tell the difference between a bobcat and a panther in the wild? All right, now the numbers are balancing out. I'm seeing about 75% of people saying they have not seen a Florida Panther. Only about 10% feel they definitely have, and then the rest are somewhere in the middle. And 42% of you are absolutely sure, even in the worst conditions, that you would be able to tell a bobcat and a panther apart. And about half of you are like, maybe I could. 10% of you say no idea how to tell them apart, can't wait to learn. So that's what we're going to talk about for sure. All right, hopefully you've answered my questions for me. I'm going to give you one more second. All right, perfect. All right, Adelaide, did you see the poll go away so it's not in the middle of our screen?
I still see it with the results. I never had it broadcasted in a way that I could respond, so.
Oh, all right. Can other people still see the poll or has it gone away?
I just got a chat that it's gone away, so I think.
Thank you all. I don't do polls very often, so every day I'm trying to learn something new, and that was it today, was the poll. All right, thank you. So let's move on to how we identify bobcats versus panthers. So bobcats are about twice the size of a domestic cat. And I would say this is a good generalization, although it really depends on how big your cat is. I've had a really large fat cat that was probably just as big as most bobcats are. So they are definitely usually taller than your regular domesticated cat, but they are often much thinner because they're very lean. They're about 15 to 35 pounds, with 35 being a really large bobcat and most likely a male. They are brownish, tannish, even a little bit reddish. They have some white fur, especially on their bellies. And they have black spots, and they are patterned with those black spots, but depending on the individual bobcat, some are more obviously spotted than others. The one you see in the picture on the top here is a bobcat, and you can see the spots pretty clearly on its back legs, but not as clearly on the rest of its body. And I'm going to show you lots of different pictures, so hopefully you'll get a sense for that. Bobcat ears also are black with a white spot in the middle of them on the back side, and I'm going to show you a better picture of that in a minute. And they have a short bobbed tail, which is where they get their name from, that has a black tip, and the underside of their tail is white fur. And often you can see the underside of their tail because it's sort of curved up, and you'll be able to see the white fur on the bottom. They have a short snout. They don't have a long face like a dog or a coyote would. Their faces are short, and they have a little bit of a ruff around their neck like a lynx does, because they are very closely related to a lynx. You can sort of see that ruff right here in this picture, but we'll have a picture, I believe, where you can see it a little bit better. Whereas Florida Panthers are going to be much larger. They are going to be, for instance, male panthers are going to be upwards of 160 pounds, and they're going to be 6 to 8 feet in length. Their tail is also much longer. A Florida Panther's tail is going to be as long as its entire body is. So half that length of the panther is actually, excuse me, its tail. The tail is going to be a nice brownish color with a black tip, and then the backs of their ears are going to be very, very dark. They will have a cream colored chest and basically a fawn, like tan colored body without those spots on it. So that's all well and good to say that, but really, most of us, if we're going to see one of these native wild cats here in Florida, we're often going to see them close to dark. We might see them running or walking away from us. So we don't always have enough time to really assess all those features. So some of the main identifying characteristics that are different between bobcats and panthers are definitely the size. So a panther is going to be as tall as your waist and maybe even taller, whereas a bobcat is going to be more to your knee level or maybe mid-thigh level, but a mid-thigh level would be a short person and a really tall bobcat. So most bobcats really only would come up to your knee if you can guesstimate their size when you see them. We're going to see pictures of their ears in a second. And those are very clearly different if you were able to see the animal walking away from you. The tails also are really a clear identifying feature. Now, bobcats' tails, some of them can be really, really short. Like I've seen some bobcat tails that are only about 2 or 3 inches long. And then I have seen some that are quite a bit longer, but they are never as long as the entire length of the bobcat's body. And they are never long enough to basically almost touch the ground. Whereas you can see in this panther picture, how much longer its tail is compared to the bobcats. And then once again, the color and patterning of the animals are very different. We have a clearly patterned spotted bobcat here on our left, and our Florida panther, unless it's a very young one, our Florida panther is going to be almost a single color other than the backs of its ears, its tail, and a little bit of markings on its face, but its body's not going to be spotted. So I inserted these pictures because these are our 2 summer interns that we had this summer at our Sarasota County Extension office. Are actually both University of Florida students as well. And they were out with me filming a virtual field trip for the Sarasota school system. And we were talking about all sorts of different animal adaptations. We took a picture of them at the end of the field trip just because they wanted to have a cool picture with all these cool things, these alligator skulls and then the bobcat. So this is a taxidermy mount of a real bobcat, and you can see how small it is compared to the size of Cassidy and Juliana, who are not giants, they are normal sized human females. And that's a pretty normal sized bobcat. Here I am holding that same mount. So once again, you get a sense of, if I were to put that bobcat down on the ground, it's only going to come up, actually it's below my knee when I put it down on the ground. So, and look at how small its head is, look at how short its tail is. You can see the underside of the tail is white, and you can see all the spots on the bobcat. So this just helps you get more of a sense of the size differential, because when you see a wild animal, especially at night, especially when you're not expecting it, sometimes in your memory or your perception, that animal becomes bigger than it really is. And this helps us to see how small bobcats actually are. So the ears, this is a great identifying feature if you actually get to see the ears from behind. Here on our left is the panther, and you can see the nice tawny color of the panther, and then the backs of their ears are pretty dark brown, blackish, and a solid color. Whereas our bobcat has very distinct contrast between the black and the white pattern on the back of its ears. And then I throw in a coyote picture here because coyote ears actually look more like panther ears because they're a single color, but they still are very different. And sometimes if the lighting isn't good and you just catch something out of the corner of your eye, you could also mistake a coyote for a panther if you're just seeing it for a brief second. But coyotes are also much smaller. Their ears are more pointed and brownish compared to the dark brown blackish of the panther. And coyotes are actually going to have a much longer dog-shaped snout if you see their face. All right, so you can, if you want, type into the chat whether or not you think this is a bobcat or a panther. Adelaide, you can let me know if anybody's typing anything in. You don't have to tell me their names. We won't let people know if they're right or wrong individually.
Yeah, fortunately we have all bobcat answers thus far.
All right, way to go. Okay, you are correct. This one is very patterned. A lot of these pictures, as you can see from the photo credit here, are actually from Jennifer Korn, who is one of our panther biologists in the state. She used to work for our Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. She now works privately. She has some amazing trail camera photos of both bobcats and panthers and sometimes other wildlife as well. So she was nice enough to share a lot of her photos with me. So clearly a bobcat, you can see the ruff around its face a little bit better in this picture, but very, very patterned, very spotted. All right, how about this one? And I'm gonna bet you guys all know this is a Florida panther. So once again, we see more of that tawny tan color that is pretty solid throughout its body, no patterning. It's got, now that we have a face of a panther, you can see that there are some darker markings on its face, but for the most part, it's pretty solid. Who's this? So take a look at the ears and the body. See if you can figure out the tail. We have any guesses, Adelaide, for this one?
All panther responses.
Very good, excellent. I could go home now. Well, actually I am teaching from home, but you guys know it all already. So you are right, this is a panther. And you can tell, I sort of feel like for the most part, panthers are a little stockier. They're a little bit more full-bodied, but it's just going to depend. And I believe this one was a male, and males will often be a little bit fuller-bodied, unless, of course, it's a pregnant female. But you can see the pretty solid dark back of the ears. There is a long tail here. It's just hard to see. You can see this black sort of marking around its face and nose, but its fur is not patterned. So we have ourselves a panther. And then last one, what do you guys think this is? I'm going to give it away. Take a look here. We've got lots of spots. We have more of a ruff around its face. So this is our bobcat. All right, so we are going to move on to looking at some other things that are identifying features. These options sometimes you may find a track in your yard and wonder who's come through. You may find scat or other markings that animals leave. So we're going to look at a few of those things so that we can help to differentiate between different animals that may frequent the area that you're in. So when we look at tracks, your bobcat track is the one in the middle here, and your bobcat track is going to be about 1.5 to 2 inches, both in height and width. Your panther track, which is all the way on the right, is really a good twice the size of your bobcat track. So upwards of 3 or maybe even more inches, depending on how old the animal is, the gender of the animal, and also its health as well. But you can see here the front track is about 3¼ inches for the panther. Its back track is about 3 inches, which is double the size of bobcats. Here we have an example of a coyote track. I honestly don't love this one. Why I don't love it is because coyotes often only show the front 2 nail marks, and usually in dog tracks, you have more of a 2-lobed back pad. So this one might not be perfectly correct, but what you do notice about it is that if you look at sort of the negative space between the pad and the toes, you can see that you could really almost draw an X here. And there's a symmetry where these 2 toes are basically straight across from each other. That is not always true with cat family tracks. And you can see here it would be really hard to sort of draw an X through the negative space here with the bobcat and the panther. Their tracks are wider and they often are not symmetrical if you look at the toes. Also, cat tracks, whether it's your cat at home, a bobcat, or a Florida panther, their back pad here will have 3 distinct lobes. And I'm going to show you some actual tracks in a second and take a look for some of those features. Also, as you probably know, those of you that have cats as pets, our cats retract their claws when they walk. And so often in wildcat tracks, you will not see those claw or nail marks like you will with foxes or coyotes or wolves. So bobcats and panthers are generally not going to show those nail marks, although I'm going to show you a picture of one that does in a second. So here's some real pictures of real tracks. And this is a dog track here. So our domestic dogs are usually a little bit wider than the coyote, which is the one in the middle. But you can see there is not really a distinct lobular or distinct lobes when you look at the back of that hind pad there. It looks almost like a triangle, or sometimes it might even look a little heart-shaped, but it does not have 3 distinct lobes like this this is a panther, like this panther track here. Okay. This is a panther track on your right where you do actually see some nail marks, and that can occur if they're running or they're leaping and they're having to push off with their back feet. Then their nails might not be retracted. So you can sometimes see the nail marks, although often you do not. Here's some more pictures of tracks. On your right, again, is a panther. This is another one that was taken by our panther biologist, and you can really clearly see those 3 distinct lobes on that pad. This one, you do not see any nail marks. And then the other 2 photos are ones that I took at Lemon Bay County Park and at the kayak launch, if you've ever been there. And one morning I got down there right before teaching a class to our elementary school kids. And you can see on this far left photo, there were all sorts of animals that had been on that sand the night before. So just to give you a sense of size, this is my footprint right here, just the top of my foot. This is the hind print of a raccoon. These are squirrel feet right here. And then right through the middle is the bobcat. And you sort of see 2 tracks on top of each other because it walked in its own tracks, basically. But that gives you a sense of size of the bobcat tracks. They really are, if you can see me in the corner of your screen, bobcat tracks really are maybe the size of like a silver dollar. Whereas our panther track is going to be pretty much almost the size of my palm. All right, I do not have a picture of panther scat, so this is the best one I could find. I apologize for it being sort of blurry, but this also just gives us a size comparison. This is a pen back here in the picture, and then this is a pile of panther scat. So panther and bobcat scat are going to have similar shape to them, and they're going to have similar contents in them, but the size is going to be really different, just like with the tracks. So cat scat is tubular, like we see here. It is frequently segmented, but panther scat is going to be up to 5 inches long and over an inch in diameter. Whereas bobcat scat is going to be like half the size. It's going to be half the length, it's going to be half the diameter, and it's going to be half the size of the pile as well. One end is usually rounded and the other end usually tapers to a point. These animals are carnivores, so their scat's going to contain fur and bones. And like many other cats, panthers and bobcats will scratch dirt or leaves over their scat. And the bare patch where they scratched up is called a scrape. So if you see one of those, that's also indicative that a bobcat or panther could be in your backyard. So I am a big fan of skulls, so I want to show you a little bit about this panther skull as well. So this really fully indicates what wonderful carnivores they are. By looking at their teeth structure, you see these large, what we call canine teeth, even though this is a feline, and even the molars are very pointed and strong. So this is an animal that's catching its prey and eating meat. I put this picture in to give you an indication of how big a panther skull is. This is actually Jennifer Korn holding her panther skull that she brings to our classes to teach from. And that's taken out of this photo on the right here, where you also can see a panther skin and a bobcat skin. And I think this is an interesting difference because I almost feel like bobcats are also sort of, I don't know a good scientific word, but they're furrier, they're softer. Their fur is very soft and just really nice, whereas panthers are almost a little more short-haired and not quite as lush in terms of their fur. I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for a second. Let's see how this works. So if you guys have me on your big screen and you can see me, I'm going to hold up a bobcat skull. So this is a bobcat skull. I'm going to take away the lower jaw so maybe you can see better. And you can see it in my hand, much smaller than the panther skull was in that picture, where Jennifer had to hold it in both her hands and it was about twice the size of her hand. So you can also tell from the bobcat skull, which is shaped very similar to a panther skull, that their sense of smell is not as well developed as their sense of eyesight. When we look at the features on the skull, they have quite large space for their eyes, and yet their snout, as I mentioned before, is short. Now I'm going to hold up a coyote skull. There we go. So coyote skull is even bigger than a bobcat because coyotes, they can weigh about the same as a bobcat, but they are larger in terms of their structure. But look at how much of a snout that coyote has, because dogs and wild dogs like coyotes really rely on their sense of smell much more so than a bobcat does. So just interesting. I find skulls fascinating. All right, let me see if I can get us back to our PowerPoint. Do you guys see it okay? I cannot see you, so tell me, Adelaide, let me know if you can see it.
You're all good, thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about the natural history or the biology of these animals. And I'm going to start to spend a little bit more time on panthers, a little less time on bobcats now that we have identified how to tell them apart. So bobcats are habitat generalists who can span almost any habitat, including urban areas and beaches. So a habitat generalist just means they're not picky about where they live. And many of you on this call probably know that because you might have seen them in your backyard or in your driveway. They do not mind us. They will be where we live, but they also often are very secretive as well. So sometimes we don't see them because they sort of stay away from us, but like our cats at home, sometimes bobcats are very curious and cat-like. I have had a bobcat sit in my driveway and just sit there and stare at me. It wasn't anything I needed to worry about. I didn't need to be concerned. It was just that curious cat nature and that cat sense of like, here I am and this is my space, so I'm just going to sit here and look at you for a few minutes. They are what we call crepuscular, which is just the fancy science word for they like to come out at dusk and dawn. Sometimes you'll hear people say they're nocturnal, which is sort of true. Crepuscular is a little bit more correct. And because they're out at those times of the evening and early morning, that's another reason why we often don't see them. Bobcats live about 3 to 4 years in the wild. And of course, in captivity, they can live much longer. The oldest captive bobcat was 32 years old. And fun fact is that bobcats only sleep for about 2 to 3 hours at a time, and they can see in the dark, like we just looked at with the skulls. They really, both bobcats and panthers, have an amazing ability at sight. And then of course they have their whiskers, which also are a sensory organ to help them feel where they are if it is dark. Panthers are also habitat generalists, but not to the degree that bobcats are, because panthers are not going to want to be in urban areas, but they will use rangelands or ranch lands, forest, prairies, and wetlands, but they like to have some forested component for cover. They stalk their prey, so they like to sort of cover or hide in forested areas as they're stalking their prey, and certainly when the females are denning with their babies as well. Male panthers will range up to 200 square miles. So this is where we start thinking about conservation and population threats. And if a male panther ranges up to 200 square miles, how do we have enough undeveloped land in Florida to start supporting a population of panthers? Because each male panther is going to need a big chunk of that, because they do not like to intersect too much with other males. Female panthers will stay near their birth area, and they'll also have a smaller range of about 75 square miles. Large female mammals usually range closer to home because they're going to just stay closer to where they're going to end up having their babies. Whereas male mammals tend to range much further because they're trying to A, find territory for themselves, and B, they're looking for females. So they're going to be wandering more. And panthers in the wild can live upwards of about 20 years. 70% of their diet comes from raccoons, white-tailed deer, and feral hogs. So that's mostly what they're eating. They are carnivores. And Adelaide's going to play us, if this all works for us in our new technology world, Adelaide's going to play for us a sound and video of panthers. Go ahead, Adelaide. Here, I'll try to stop sharing. Perfect. All right, so we'll go back to our presentation. So they don't really roar. They make all sorts of interesting little chirping, purring, hissing, and growling sorts of sounds. When we talk about reproduction, bobcats breed from August to March, and their litters range from about 1 to 4 kittens. And bobcats leave their moms at about 8 months of age. So Florida panthers, they can breed year-round, although generally most of the babies are born in about that same time, about March to July. So sorry, yeah, about March till July is when most of the kittens are born for panthers. Same thing, they have about 1 to 4 kittens. Their average birth rate is about 2.5 kittens per female. And the females will den in palmettos or other types of thick vegetation. And the young panthers stay with their moms a lot longer than the bobcat kittens do. The young panthers will stay with their moms until they're about 1.5 to 2 years old. And this is the only population of breeding puma east of the Mississippi. And we didn't really talk about that yet, but we're going to talk about how the Florida panther is a subspecies of puma, so we will get to that. But it is our only breeding puma east of the Mississippi now. So the green on this slide is where Florida Panthers used to be, and the red is where they currently are. So you can see that their range has dramatically decreased, and of course their population, as we all know, has been very threatened for a while and has dramatically decreased from what it would have been historically. Bobcats, on the other hand, they are all throughout North America for the most part, and much of Canada and Mexico as well. Bobcats are, they are doing really well, although we are seeing a slight decrease in their numbers, likely due to development and habitat loss, whereas Florida Panthers, of course, are listed as endangered. They occupy only about 5% of their original range, and they were listed as endangered in Florida in 1958 and in our entire country in 1967. So there's state listing and federal listing. So they were federally listed in 1967. And they're currently protected under the Endangered Species Act. There's a sort of range of how many panthers we currently think there are. We can't really know for sure because we aren't monitoring every individual panther, but we now think there's about 120 to, actually the new figures are even maybe upwards of 260 panthers, whereas in the 1980s they were down to about 20 or 30 in number. And our panthers are going to live south of Lake Okeechobee or the Caloosahatchee River, although male panthers have been found to range north of the Caloosahatchee. And in the last couple of years, we have had 1 or 2 females seen on trail cameras that actually were north of the Caloosahatchee. And we know that at least one of them actually had kittens north of the river too. And this was huge in panther biology because going north of the Caloosahatchee for a female had not happened in a really long time. And then to actually see her with kittens as well was amazing. So of course, our major threats to both bobcats and panthers are habitat loss and fragmentation, and especially for panthers, roads crossing their territory. That's the major source of death currently. So historically, panthers were viewed as a threat to livestock and they were hunted aggressively, which was part of the reason that their numbers decreased. There was a research program that started in 1981, and they basically were collaring the cats and tracking them using a VHF form of GPS. And in 1995, they started pinpointing the dens of the females, and they were able to actually know when the female left her den, and then the biologist could go in and actually do a health check on the kittens and take measurements and do things to help the kittens to be healthier. And that also provided more information and greater understanding of the species in general. So in the 1990s, it was estimated that there were about 20 to 30 individuals left, and they were inbreeding. So that caused a lot of abnormalities. Some of the abnormalities included atrial septal defects. This is a heart defect. Some abnormalities that didn't necessarily cause a health situation were that the tails were kinking at the 5th vertebrae at the bottom of the tail. It would actually bend. There were also cowlicks in the fur, so those two things aren't necessarily going to kill that individual panther, but they are indications that genetically things were not as good as they should have been. Also, they were finding increased parasite loads and a decreased immunity in these panthers due to inbreeding. So this really didn't look good. I mean, 20 to 30 individuals of a population isn't good to begin with, but then to have all of these active signs, some of which were actually threatening the individual's health, really was very concerning. Also, we were starting to have very few viable offspring because of something called cryptorchidism, which is an undescended testicle in the male panthers. if both testicles are undescended in a male panther, then they are not able to have offspring. They're not able to mate and have viable kittens. So, so we were also seeing a decrease or a potential future decrease in the numbers because mating was not going to be viable. So what's been done and what was historically done for conservation? So 300,000 acres of panther habitat has been protected, which is great, really important, although we probably always need more. There was improved management of some of the prey animals, and also the roads were looked at, especially Alligator Alley, so 75 and 41, both bisect Florida from east to west in southern Florida. And that is where we do see a lot of panther deaths. So they created highway underpasses as an opportunity for the panthers to be able to cross under those roads safely. So the other thing that was done in 1995 was something that was controversial called genetic health restoration. So what this is when you bring in animals from another population to help increase the genetic diversity of the panther. So not only did we have decreased numbers, we had decreased genetic diversity, which was causing all that inbreeding. When you bring in another species that can breed with the Florida panther, like the Texas Puma, you are going to improve that genetic pool. But there were a lot of concerns about, would this work? Was it going to change the genetics of the Florida panther so much that we wouldn't have Florida panthers anymore? And actually we found that this was an incredibly successful technique. So in 1995, they released 8 female Texas Pumas, and on this picture you can see the red dots are where they actually released them, not out there in the middle of the ocean, but on land. And by 2003, so 8 years later, none of those Pumas remained in Florida. So at that point, our Florida panther population was genetically stable enough that they were able to continue breeding and have the genetic diversity necessary. So here's our success story. So 5 of the 8 Texas females did produce kittens. Out of those 5 females, they had at least 20 kittens. There was a survival rate of those kittens and a growth rate that was higher than just the panther babies that had been bred without the Texas females. And the offspring of the Texas females and the male Florida panthers successfully reproduced, which of course is the other step we need. We need healthy kittens, but then we need those kittens to grow up and be able to continue the genetic mixing. And that did happen. Our numbers jumped from 20 to 30 panthers in the early 1990s to over 120 after this introduction. And the frequency of those genetic abnormalities plummeted. So we really have a much healthier population, and they've done recent taxonomical research to see if the current panthers, some of them being the admixed panthers or the panthers that have descended from the Texas Puma Florida Panther mix, that they've looked at the genetics of those panthers and they have found that actually our Florida panthers are retaining the true Florida panther characteristics that make them an individual subspecies. So for the group that was worried about sort of the purity of the DNA of our Florida panthers, it seems like our Florida panthers are retaining their subspecies characteristics. And just for those of you that might be interested, the subspecies characteristics of the Florida panther, they're not things that you would necessarily obviously see. They are slightly different colored from some of the other pumas. And they also have a slightly different part of their skull right along their nasal bone. And those are some of the differences, nothing really big. Subspecies mean that they do have different characteristics than the other subspecies, but they can still interbreed with each other, so they aren't separate species. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about threats to population and start winding down so that we can do some Q&A. So I like to show this in a lot of my webinars. So if you've been to my other webinars, you've probably seen it. On our left-hand side is Florida 2010 from our census data. The red dots are the developed areas in our state, and the light green and dark green are protected areas, either protected in agriculture or protected in other ways, like as a state or national or even county park, or a conservation easement or something like that. So in 2010, you clearly see the Everglades in that tip of South Florida where the majority of panthers live. But there's also still green area up through Lake Okeechobee and almost all the way into the center of the state, where we then hit sort of the I-4 corridor. When we look at the projection for 2070 on the right, there's much more red, there's much more development. We have almost 1,000 people a day, at least before COVID, 1,000 people a day moving into Florida, not just coming here to visit, but coming here to live. And so of course with that comes the need for housing and grocery stores and things like that. And so if the trend continues, this is what's expected for 2070. And I like to show this because I just like us to think about, well, where are these large mammals going to go? Where are the panthers and the bears going to go if they don't have the land, the contiguous land they need for territories and for their home range? So this is the #1 major threat to the population of panthers. As we said, bobcats, they're not listed, they're not endangered, they're doing okay, although we are seeing some decreases in their population due to the same reasons, but Florida panthers are really threatened due to that land development. And it's not just habitat loss, it's habitat fragmentation. So even if we had the same amount of saved land for them, but it was broken up into pieces, that would be just as much of a threat to their extinction as if we wiped away half the Everglades. So when we fragment habitat, whether it's for something small like a songbird or something large like a panther, they don't have the corridors that they need to travel to get from one place to another. And so then we start seeing vehicle collisions, which kill 59% of our Florida panthers. In 2019, 22 of the 26 panthers that were killed by a car on a roadway. So when we fragment their habitat, especially with roads, we unfortunately are leading to huge decreases in their population. The other threat is intraspecific aggression. This is when panthers kill other panthers. And this often happens when, once again, the population starts to be squeezed into a smaller area, and then the males get territorial, and the younger males don't have room to find their own territory, and so the younger males and the older males fight. So 16% of panther death is due to this intraspecific aggression, which honestly is secondary to habitat fragmentation and loss. And then some of the other causes of death are going to be disease, and we're going to talk about feline leukomyelopathy, which is a new disease that's been noticed in our bobcats and panthers. Another cause of death to panthers is illegal shootings, which hopefully doesn't happen that often anymore, but may still. So let's talk a little bit about this thing called feline leukomyelopathy. This is a new disease that was noticed in panthers. The first cases were seen in 2018, and they only named it in January of this year. The symptoms, we think it's a neurological disease that's affecting the white matter of the brain, and the symptoms are like this strange, altered, out of balance gait. And when they have been able to actually do some biopsies and study this disease in panthers and bobcats that have been affected, It is evidenced by tissue changes in both the brain and the spine. So Adelaide, do you think you can share the nightly news clip there with us? So this is a news story, and it shows some footage of
the rare Florida panther, one of nature's most graceful and athletic creatures, now laid low by a mysterious threat. Florida's Fish and Wildlife Agency sharing this video of a panther and bobcat struggling to walk, stumbling, then falling, their hind legs virtually useless.
My best guess is that these animals have ingested some type of toxin.
Authorities have confirmed 2 cases of neurological damage to these big cats. Trail cameras show at least 9 others, mostly kittens, hobbled with similar symptoms. With fewer than 200 Florida panthers estimated in the wild, they're protected by the Endangered Species Act. Biologists have yet to determine what's crippling the cats. Experts are testing for various potential toxins, as well as infectious diseases and nutritional deficiencies.
Until they're actually able to put their hands on an animal, I don't know if they'll be sure exactly what's causing this problem.
State wildlife officials are now asking for the public's help, hoping more footage of stumbling wild cats may lead to an answer of how widespread and long-lasting these symptoms may be. Kerry Sanders, NBC News.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out.
All right, so you got a sense, even though I know the video always comes across a little shaky on Zoom, but you got a sense for basically it's their back legs that are affected. They stumble, they lose their balance, they're slower than their counterparts, which of course is going to affect their ability to survive in the wild. Currently, as of August 24th of this year, the FWC was able to identify 7 bobcats and 2 Florida panthers that they know had this disease. And they, of course, are biopsying, studying those cats to try to learn more about it. There's a lot more to learn. We really don't understand. We don't know the cause. There's been a lot of things sort of thrown out there as possibilities, but we really don't understand what's causing it. We don't know how to treat it. We don't even know if it's passed down from a mother to kittens. I'm not going to show this other video because we're short on time, but the picture in the bottom of your screen is one of the kittens one of 2 kittens that was taken from an infected mom, and FWC had been following this infected mom. I think they had her collared, as well as she was showing up on trail cameras. And so they were watching her over time, and it got to a point where they realized that she just wasn't going to survive. And so they went out and took her newborn kittens because she just wasn't going to be able to keep them alive, and they were not going to be able to live. And so those 2 cats are now, they're not going to be able to be released ever into the wild again because they were 2 weeks old when they had to be rescued. But they are an opportunity for biologists to watch them grow and develop and see what happens and see if this disease is passed down. And you can go to YouTube. It's on YouTube. It's a cute little short video of this little baby panther playing. So why do we need wildcats? Well, all of our animals and plants are an important part of our ecosystems and preserve biodiversity. The panthers and the bobcats especially are what we consider umbrella species, and healthy populations of these umbrella species translates to healthy ecosystems and healthy populations of other animals in that ecosystem. They're also as natural predators, sort of cleaning up some of the other, what we would call mesopredators, or sort of middle range predators that maybe we don't want to be overrun with, things like raccoons and of course our feral hogs. So they do provide that important balance in our ecosystem. And of course, they're just beautiful and wonderful. So how can you help? This is actually a picture of a bobcat right outside my mom's deck in Nokomis. And so as our development encroaches into or next to our natural areas, there's just going to be more conflict between humans and wildlife, and there's going to be less space for that wildlife. So thinking smart about how we develop. We're probably not going to be able to stop development because there's more and more people, but we can be smart about, or smarter about, how we develop. You want to support wildlife on your own property by growing native plants and areas of thick cover if you want to see, for instance, these bobcats. And reduce urban conflicts by keeping your pet food and your garbage secured or indoors and protecting your livestock. And avoiding the use of poisons and biocides to kill rodents and other pests, because that can either be gotten into by things like other wildlife, or it can transfer up the food chain as well. You can support something called the Florida Wildlife Corridor, and Adelaide's going to try to get some of these links into the chat box, but the Florida Wildlife Corridor, if you don't know about that, I highly recommend you look into it. They have some amazingly beautiful documentaries. Their website is beautiful, and they are working very hard to support larger areas of continuous or contiguous habitat for both panthers and bear. If you really know that you saw a panther, FWC wants to know that. It just helps them learn more about where they are. So there's a place you can report a panther sighting, and certainly a phone number if you see a dead or injured panther. That's really important as well. So drive slowly and stay alert in these panther areas in South Florida. I often have this quote in my talks as well because I love it. I really think one of the best ways that we can help all of our wildlife and our Florida ecosystems is to learn about them and then to share that information with others. Because in the end, we will conserve only what we love will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. This is a picture of my son. Last year, he was 13 years old, hugging a tree. He's a good boy like that. Super proud of my kids, are both very concerned about our ecosystems. And last year, he actually came face to face with a mountain lion out in Seattle. So he has a spirit animal of one of these pumas. Here are some of the resources that I used, and if Adelaide can, she'll try to get these in the chat box too. You can't click on the presentation to access any of these links, but when Adelaide puts them in the chat box, you can click on them, and even once you're out of the presentation, if you've clicked on them, they will be on your computer for you to look at. All right, trivia, and then we're going to do Q&A. Which of the following is not a common name for the Florida panther or other subspecies? Jaguar. Jaguars are completely different, whereas the other three of these are all subspecies. All right, what is the name of the practice where bobcats and Florida panthers cover their prey with dirt, grass, or leaves to keep away scavengers? The answer to that one is catching. So they scrape to cover their excrement, but they cache to hide and cover the food that they're not going to eat in the moment. And then, which is the only state in the continental US that doesn't have bobcats? Surprise! Delaware, for some reason, does not have bobcats. They think they were sort of pushed out because every other state in our country does. Thank you very much. Please feel free to reach out to me. And if you're watching this presentation later on YouTube, there will be a survey link in the information box on YouTube as well. So thank you all very much. I hope you learned fun things about our Florida native wildcats.